Hi students, welcome to week 6 of Business 426, Production Management and Operations. Let's dive into it here. These are the learning objectives for this week. We're going to look at what's called sales and operations planning. We've been looking at a lot of the functions of sales and operations, but let's see how it all starts to come together. We're going to look at what's called aggregate planning. It's not a scary term, it's just really the term aggregate means mix or all together. We're also going to study some inventory concepts, how it's used and how it's like what it costs and that sort of thing. And then we're going to look at different inventory control systems. There's inventory and then there's the control systems around the inventory. And then in your book, you're also going to study the Pareto principle of analyzing inventory, like which kinds of inventory that you need. So what is sales and operations planning? Well, very simply, it's a series of meetings. I know that sounds very almost too simplistic, but when you do sales and operations planning, you never do it in a vacuum. You pull together all the different functions of the organization as you need them to do some planning on what you need and when you need to produce it and where it needs to be shipped to. And you do consider things like customer lead times, suppliers, availability of material, and your own production schedule for other customers and whatnot. So this is a real simple, not a simple diagram. This is a fairly dense diagram, but it sort of lays out simply the whole process in one diagram. So you can check this out in your book as well. But wherever you see the word planning in this diagram, translate the word to meeting. Okay, so this is a process meeting. There's a supplier network meeting, and in this supplier network meeting, for example, you pull together key suppliers to find out what their availability is to support your production needs. This sales and operations planning is where you pull together the primary functions of the organization to see what needs to be produced and when. And usually you have like a strategic plan in mind when you do this. We do this in our company all the time. When we talk about staffing people, where we're going to put our staffing, if there's a limited number of people, where are we going to put them at? What are the qualifications to go to a certain customer? That's an example of sales and operations planning on the service side. If you're in a manufacturing organization, you look at things like what's called material requirements planning. And material requirements planning is the idea of understanding what material you need from which suppliers and when you need it to produce product. But again, that's a series of meetings that you have with the other planners. Logistically, you figure out how you're going to ship things. That's a vehicle capacity planning meeting, or a logistics meeting if you want to call it that, if you're sending things by rail or plane. And then there's this service kind of meeting where you would plan the workforce, like how many people you need on which days are going to work overtime and that sort of thing. And there's different types of planning. There's long-range planning, which is about a year or more. There's intermediate, which is at 3 to 18 months, and then anything less than 3 months is really considered short-range planning. The production planning system itself is kind of divided into two hemispheres, if you will. There's all the things going on in the external, outside the business, and there's what's going on inside the business as well. These come together in a production planning meeting. Typically in a manufacturing environment, for example, you have a production planning meeting that goes on every single day, sometimes twice a day. If you work in a service organization, you might get together, for example, at the start of a shift or the start of a business day and plan your day out. And this is where all these different things kind of come together for a plan for the day. And then you do start talking about intermediate and a long-range plan after that. But most immediately, every single day, you have some sort of production planning meeting. Now, there's different ways to look at these production planning meetings. You can produce to exact monthly production requirements, and you can vary the workforce size. You can produce to meet the expected demand by maintaining a constant workforce size. So you have some variables that you're flipping back and forth. Time and work size of workforce. You can produce to meet the minimum expected demand and just not worry about it if you miss shipments. Not a good idea, by the way, over here. Or you can do a hybrid of these as well. So when you're doing this planning, you have to remember that you can vary the time, you can vary the labor, and really between those two variables, you end up meeting your demand in some way or another. Let's talk about inventory for a moment. So inventory, I think I've mentioned this before. Inventory has to be like seen as dollar bills sitting on your on your service floor, like in the grocery store, or if you work in somewhere other retail, wherever you see a pair of shoes that's being sold or clothing being sold. As an operations manager, you need to see the dollars hanging on the rack. Or if you're in manufacturing, you've produced material, it's goods sitting on the floor. Those are dollars actually sitting there, not making any money for you until you actually sell them. Most businesses that, if you look on the balance sheet, underneath the assets and look at inventory, it's usually the largest item sitting there. And if you look at like a dollar candy bar sitting on the rack or sitting on the shelf at the grocery store, that thing costs probably about 30 cents to actually produce, and you're going to sell it for $1. So it kind of gives you an idea of the amount of money you have sitting around. And again, inventory is the stock of any item or resource that's used in an organization. So in manufacturing, you have a number of different kinds of inventory: raw materials, which come in from your suppliers, finished products that you actually make and put on the shipping dock ready to go out to your customers, component parts, again, that may be coming in from suppliers. You have different supplies that help you make the product. And you have this thing called work in process. Work in process is inventory that's been partially converted to a finished good, but not all the way. So it's like pieces of parts been put together, but they're not quite all the way to a finished good that you can sell. Then there's the inventory system that's wrapped around the inventory that controls it, tells you what you need, when you need it, and where you need it. Number of purposes of inventory. Meeting variation in product demand. So you want to have enough inventory on hand that you can handle spikes of customer demand coming in. And this can be tough in a service industry because some inventory is available in services. Like if you work in a restaurant, you can inventory food, but you can't always inventory the service itself. Like if you get a spike right at the end of the day, you may not have enough waiters or waitresses to handle a busload of people coming in. So you may not be able to handle that kind of variation in demand. But you also have inventory to maintain independence of operations. So if your supplier goes down, you can still keep going for a while because of the inventory you have. We are looking this week at chapter 20. And so we're studying like from the warehouse to the customer or the retail store inventory part of the supply chain. Next week, we're studying what's called the MRP system. And in the MRP system, it's a little bit lower down in the organization, but you actually project what kind of raw materials you need to meet customer demand way up here. And that's done through this material requirements planning system. And it really builds the inventory in the plant. It's shipped to a warehouse, shipped to a retail, or whatever the case would be. And there's different models for doing each of these. In chapter 20, make sure you read up on the single period, fixed period, and fixed time period models for predicting inventory. In the inventory control system, there's this design matrix. So the way to look at this diagram is, and what's called a manual two-bin system, it's really nothing more than, say, like in a hospital, you've got a number of some sort of medicine that you're giving out to people. It would be in two bins. There's the bin that you pull from to give to patients, and then there's the extra bin. And when the first bin is empty, you then start pulling from the second bin. As soon as you start pulling from that second bin, you reorder for the first bin. All right. And when you do that, you kind of separate yourself from the supplier. You have one bin, if you will, that separates emptiness between you and the supplier. So you're independent until you empty that second bin. But the transaction cost is high because you have a number of pieces of inventory stacked up in that second bin that you're not using for a while. And the obsolescence is a risk too. It's pretty high in that system because what happens if the medicine in that second bin, for example, what happens if that expires or the expiration date comes and goes? And at the other end, you have the synchronous manufacturing process, those Skittles that I showed you. Transaction cost is low. Hardly anybody is touching that inventory as it's being made. Very few people, workers get involved with that. But you're very dependent on suppliers to keep material coming into the plant. And the obsolescence, though, is pretty low, too. As soon as you make those Skittles, they go to a package and they get shipped. Safety stock, let's talk about this before we end up. So safety stock is what you keep in your plant, or extra food in a restaurant, for example, or maybe it's something in the grocery store. Around here, it's kind of funny. They keep an extra, in the wintertime in the grocery stores around here, they keep extra stock of like bread, toiletries, water, milk, baby formula, that sort of thing. All the things that you might need if a major snowstorm comes through. And when it happens, when we have a prediction of a major snowstorm, people rush to their grocery stores and they pull all that stuff off the shelves. So that's an example of how safety stock is used in a service industry. But a common approach is to simply like keep a number of weeks or a number of days on hand to handle that kind of spike when people come in for whatever the reason. And then a better approach is actually to use a statistical method. And if you've taken a stats class, it would be the idea of you would want to handle up to like 95% of the time you'd want to have material on the shelf or material on your plant and ready to go. Make sure you read about safety stock. All right, so read chapters 19 and 20. Be looking forward to week 7 and week 8. They are like projects like you're just completing right now with week 5, so they're fairly intensive. And again, the assignments are due on Sunday at midnight, basically 11:59. All right, have a great week. Remember, God is on his throne.